an intriguing quote without context, which then becomes contextualized and becomes funnier because of it. We have a lot of follow-up. Most of it is self-appointed follow-up, shall I say? That's not the phrase I'm looking for. It's mostly follow-up because we want to correct things, rather than anyone has corrected us. Do you want to start that off?
Well, I think this is the purest form of follow-up. This is what follow-up originated as, was just corrections from the previous episode. So I'm going to quickly run through SpaceX, and then I promise I won't talk about it again this episode. The delays for launching are probably not caused by the US government shutdown, which is still going on, which blows my mind. But it's probably not caused by that. SpaceX can launch with what little of NASA is still running, as proven by the fact they launched within days of our recording the last episode.
And probably before it came out as well.
And definitely before it came out. And so the same is true for like the crewed demo flight, or the uncrewed demo flight of the crew capsule. It is being delayed, but probably not by the US government at the moment. A geographical correction, which is quite funny. I, in the last episode, quite confidently and with great authority declared that Texas has no coastline. It has rather a large coastline along the east. Shocking.
300 miles of it, I believe.
300 miles of coast. And SpaceX have built their launch facility right on the east coast of Texas, which makes sense, obviously. So they launch over the Gulf of Mexico, so there's no weirdness with that. And there's also a fantastic article that we will link to in the show notes, an interview with Elon Musk about why they're building the Starship out of stainless steel. And it basically boils down to a few things that we did mention. Like overall, it is lighter because they don't need to do quite as much for the thermal management of it. And a few other really interesting things. Apparently, this particular grade of stainless gets stronger when you make it colder, which is fascinating. And they also want to do like micro pores in the hull so that they can run some kind of liquid just under the skin of it, which can then like seep through these tiny little holes and form like a vapor barrier between the rocket and the atmosphere to help further insulate it and stuff. So they're very interesting things.
Basically, it's a rocket that sweats.
Yes. It's a sweaty rocket, sweaty, shiny rocket. And I think we should stop that given last episode's title. That's it for SpaceX stuff. I'm done, unless you have anything else to say about it.
That is the shortest SpaceX segment we've ever done. Congratulations.
I guess we can move on to follow-up from Bugglebots and our discussions about that last episode as well. Just quickly to start with, there was a really, really good article or series of articles linked in the subreddit last episode about a team's journey with Melty Brain, which is fascinating and you should go and read. Link will be in the show notes.
Yeah, it went through all the stuff about how the accelerometers handle things, the issues they can encounter with drift and with instability in the floor. It was largely what we said, but from someone that actually knows what they're talking about with so much technical detail, if that's what you want. Have you been through the code part yet? Because I'd be interested to see what you think of the code part.
I haven't got to the code part. That'll be follow-up next time.
That's the whole of next episode.
Or
Sam talks code.
I can look at it now.
No, you can't. We've already got a lot of follow-up.
I'm not going to look at the code.
That's probably for the best.
Cut.
And now we get on to the Ryan regrets things he said segment of this follow-up. I had a big struggle editing this episode. Partly because I'm terrible at editing, but more because there was probably about 30% of that episode that I was just fundamentally unhappy with because of the conversations we were having and my contributions to them. And a lot of things that I want to fix in that. Conversations that we knew were kind of risky at the time, which I think went reasonably well, but should have gone better. Botched conversation number one was removable links, where I think you said it best when you said afterwards that we were having two entirely different conversations.
Yes, when listening back, it became very, very clear to me that I was talking about removable links and the American-style sort of switch thing as the same thing. And in my head, the conversation was framed about whether or not you needed a way to safely turn off the robot. Whereas I think, Ryan, you were having the correct conversation here, the far more interesting conversation about whether or not removable links are the correct way to go about that.
Yeah, I was talking more about whether switches were in certain situations not only a viable alternative, but a preferable alternative. And
Yeah.
I'm a little bit offended that you thought I was suggesting that we should just leave robots turned on. So yeah, for the utmost clarity, what I was suggesting was that there are certain situations in which a finger-style switch is a safer and more reliable method of activating and deactivating a robot, especially at this weight class, because with links, you're potentially going to need 2 hands to pull those out, whereas with a switch, it can be just 1 hand. One thing that was also mentioned on Twitter by Mr. Psycho was, of course, the American style, which is to have an internal switch that kind of screws and to access that with a tool, which is obviously really good for not having to make any physical contact with the robot whatsoever. That I see as a big advantage, and they clearly work very well in America. They're ubiquitous in America. Everyone seems to love them. The only slight reservation I have about that system is the potential, and it's probably quite small potential, for damage to your armor to make that switch inaccessible.
Yeah.
Because you're kind of sticking a tool through a small hole. If that hole becomes misaligned, I can see you then not being able to deactivate your robot. That's the only worry I would have about using that personally.
Yeah. The other sort of thing that stood out to me is the requirement for a tool in the first place. But I don't know how much of a big deal that is. I can't imagine you're ever going to be in a situation where the person in charge of safety doesn't have the tool handy, but, you know, things happen.
Well, bear in mind, the roboteer is going to be responsible for having that tool with them. If they don't have it with them, they can't turn it on.
Yeah, that's true.
So unless they somehow manage to lose it during a fight, which isn't impossible, you would expect that that wouldn't be a problem. But again, it's a valid concern.
Yeah. Maybe it's the nanny state that I live in that's making me think that way.
Or maybe you just lose a lot of hex keys.
I did buy a bunch today, actually.
Well, you're sorted. Again, though, I imagine that with those switches, it is the same tool being used by everyone.
I would
Which
imagine
again
so.
means that you're even more likely to have the tool to hand should you need it.
Yeah.
And of course, really, the biggest safety thing is just making sure that you are running in suitable arenas in the first place. And making sure that you treat that robot with the respect it deserves. So if you are activating and deactivating a robot, trying to do that from behind a barrier, when you do see a lot of people who seem very happy to just stand leaning over their big bar spinner, activating it. When, if that thing did start up, I think it's probably going to shock them off of balance enough that they could be in some real trouble.
It does blow my mind that people are willing to do that. So I've got small experiences with this kind of thing. One on the remote control plane that I've been building, where we didn't turn the transmitter off quite as often as we should have done when we were I would make a quick adjustment and not bother turning everything off because it's just, I'm just fiddling with one thing just quickly, so it's fine. And then, like, even though you're sort of aware, don't raise the throttle, obviously. You still, like, you might, swing the transmitter down, like, by your side and then brush the thing with your leg. And all of a sudden the thing turns on when someone's hand is right next to the propeller and stuff, which is not going to kill anyone, but it's if nothing else, it's a bit of a shock. So, like, these things definitely happen. Even if you sort of think you're being all careful and stuff, the best way to make sure it's not going to turn on or, like, suddenly start hurting people is just to turn it off altogether. And the other experience is on my skateboard, where occasionally I brush the throttle on that and start moving when I'm not quite expecting to and stuff like that. So
You hurt yourself on it enough without accidents like that.
yeah.
I must admit, and bingo cards at the ready here, listeners.
Oh, God.
I've always been surprised, but I shouldn't be, by how careful you are around split decision.
Ding, ding, ding.
I think you're completely right to be, but I just don't feel it in the same way that you clearly do. To me, as someone who believes they're a pragmatic person, I, having had experiences of trying to cut something with that scalpel, aren't scared of it. But the way you treat it is the correct way. I know that I'm too lax with it.
Well, as someone who has been cut by a scalpel.
Yeah, but that thing is blunt as anything.
That's not really the point, though.
You, I think, would be nervous running it even with the weapon cover on, whereas I would be completely fine with that. I would attack my own foot with it quite happily. Which probably makes me a stupid person.
Yeah, I don't know about stupid, but it's just a difference in risk assessment, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and to be fair, I think that's true of us in general, that I am a stupid physical risk taker.
I don't want to characterize it as stupid. I just think we make different calls on things, because I think I probably go too far the other way in a lot of areas. I think there are risks that I don't take that sort of like in hindsight you think, maybe I should have done. Maybe I'd have got something out if I'd pushed that bit further or whatever. But like, it's just the way we are.
I think to become match-winning drivers, I mean, I'm already a fight-winning driver. I don't know about you. We need the practice, which means we need to take that risk.
Yeah.
But I'm joking about that, and I shouldn't be, because this is exactly the kind of thing we're talking about when you do go up weight classes, that he's ridiculously stupid. And it's a point that I'm going to make again in about 3 minutes. Okay. So I probably shouldn't contradict myself too much. And with that, we'll get on to kitbots. Again, a touchy conversation. And listening back through it, even though we said time and time again, this is not a conversation purely about the D2, it ended up being. And that's my fault, because I came into that underprepared. I should have had all the information in front of me about everything so that we could talk about it in a more balanced way. So that's what I'm going to address now. So I want to really quickly point out the 2 other main kits that are out there, pretty much mainly American, both for the 3-pounder beetle weight class out there. So first of all, we have the Kinetic, which is a 2-wheel drive beater from Kitbots. Milled plastic body. It does require assembly in the same way the D2 does, which is something that we didn't talk about at the time and should have. You do still have to build the D2. It requires assembly, but it comes with basically everything. The D2 you still need to buy some bits for. So in terms of what we were saying about barriers to entry, there is a certain amount of skill involved in putting all of these together that we maybe didn't give enough credit for. We've also got, and I'm going to butcher the pronunciation, it's either the Wetter or the Wheater, which is another spinner, a 2-wheel drive drum from... I've got it down as being from Kitbots as well. That's almost certainly not true. I still haven't prepared well enough. I'm sorry.
Some things never change.
He says as I sit here with 4 pages of notes. This, again, needs almost full assembly. It is, however, the only website of the bunch that I've looked through that actually makes clear that this is a fairly difficult thing to put together, which I appreciate them doing. They do, however, also offer it just completed if you want that as a special request. Now, both of these worry me more than the D2, because these are fully functioning spinners, which people can buy and assemble. And that concerns me purely because something that's happened a lot more recently, I feel. Maybe it always happened, I just never saw it. There's been a real spate recently of posts on Reddit and on Facebook from people basically saying, hey, my school is having a robot competition. How do I build a mini tombstone? And then obviously sensible questions are asked, like, okay, well, what are the rules of this competition? We don't really have any rules. What's the arena for this competition? Oh, we've chalked out a square on the backfield. The fact that, we've been having the safety conversation, the fact that people are so easily able to underestimate the danger of these things makes me worry about the idea of people being able to access them so easily. So for me, while I've complained about the D2 being so competitive, it is at least a sensible first robot. Whereas these feel like the kind of thing that you would expect someone to buy as maybe a second robot, not necessarily something you would want to encourage people to start with. I'm sure there are many people out there who can buy it and handle it safely. I'm sure that is the majority of people. But it's still in the back of my mind of, that's a pretty powerful thing to give someone.
I'm not sure it is fair to say that the majority of people would handle a spinner safely. I think it is so, especially at this size class, to this or ant weights and stuff, I think it is so easy to dramatically underestimate how dangerous those things can be, even by people that sort of like know what's going on. And I think I can sort of just imagine these, like, I'm going to describe it as like an unofficial tournament, but like a just sort of like a more ad hoc get together of people that have done these things, and someone's bought their new toy, and they have got an arena that maybe doesn't even have any side walls, or it's just like I said, a chalk outline on the ground, and they go, oh, I'll get my spinner out and sort of show off what it can do, and you sort of get all excited and stuff, and you sort of forget a little bit about the fact that this is about to send bits of other robots potentially flying upwards towards your face and eyes and all that stuff. So I think it's and I suspect that's much more likely to happen than you maybe are willing to admit to yourself, I guess, in some ways. Like I think it's very easy to sort of get sucked into those moments and sort of just stop thinking about what's going on there.
I guess I'm thinking specifically with the kits that these aren't easy things to find.
No.
You know, if you just search robot kit, you're going to get lots of little line following things and stuff like that. I think to find something like the D2, the Kinetic, the Weta, and all of these, you would almost need to have a bit of an in to realise that they exist.
But I don't think it's...
So I think the kind of people that are going to come to these probably are on the better end of the scale in terms of the awareness of the risks.
I'm even thinking about that sort of selection of people. I still think people underestimate what's about to happen with those things. I still think people underestimate. Again, maybe this is just the difference in the way our internal processes for risk assessment work. Maybe I'm just a lot more nervous and a lot more conservative with these things. But like I just sort of I think they're more dangerous than people expect. And I think probably a lot of that comes from the fact that they're more dangerous than I expect them to be, I think.
Whereas again, I suppose as someone who is underestimating the risks of our machine, potentially, probably am not the best person to estimate how well other people estimate risks. So yeah, that's... Again, I still feel like I should be doing better on this, but I hope that's a slightly more balanced version of what I said last time. I stand by what I said about the D2 in particular, but I think it's worth pointing those out. I also want to mention what I think is an example of a kit that gets it right, which is the Fingertech Viper kit, which is a US amp weight, so that's 432 grams, I want to say.
Okay.
Now, what I love about this is that, first of all, it's a two-wheel drive wedge. It's made, I think, in aluminium, but with a sort of fairly expendable front wedge cover itself. So the main thing is quite sturdy, but you've got a bit that's going to potentially break quite easily that you could fix. It's also a material that's easy to work with to upgrade and change. And what I love about the Fingertech Viper is that they very specifically say this is designed for you to add to. And they sell it 25% underweight.
Nice.
So what you've got is something that out of the box you can drive and practice with safely. You could enter it into a tournament and not get steamrolled. But it's coming with an inherent disadvantage until you do something to it.
Yeah.
They sell weapon add-on kits, which again, if you want to buy and install, fantastic. That's another nice little midpoint that bring them up to weight and add an active weapon. But there's also so much scope to do that yourself. That, I think, is the ideal model. If the D2 was sold that way, as in, here is a beetle weight, you've got another 300 grams of weight to play with, see what you can add, I think I'd be a lot happier with it. Although I feel like a lot of people would still probably run it as is. At least you would then feel, well, other people that are coming in with something that they've shaved every gram off to get it to weight, that work is being rewarded with an advantage in the arena.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think coming in with, or having a kit bot that is underweight, that you're expected to add things to, is a good technique. And I think it's sort of like, I guess it sort of highlights that it's good to have ways in at various levels. Like you could go all in, and it's like we bought the motors and the sort of receiver and speed controller as sort of like one package when we started building our robots, because it's sort of like, you know, that those three things are going to work together, and the speed controller and receiver are like one unit that you know works. Obviously, the next step on from that would be buy those parts separately and wire them up yourself, which gives you a bit more flexibility and stuff. And I think it's good that there are parts the other way as well, where you can go, okay, you can buy like a series of quite modular components that you can just sort of very easily wire together yourself like we did, or you can go one step further and buy an underweight robot that you can add to yourself. And I do think there is value in having that final step of you can buy a complete and competitive robot.
It still just doesn't feel right to me. It does not sit right at all.
Yeah.
But again, if people are going to offer that option, I'm glad that the most popular one is the 4-wheel drive wedge and not the big scary spinner.
Yeah.
Yeah, if there's going to be a ubiquitous kit out of these, I would rather it with the D2. But yeah, I at least feel that this time, rather than coming to the table with a bunch of problems, I've at least been able to come to the table with a solution. So I now feel that I've done my job a bit better.
Well done.
There were also a couple of really good comments on that point. One, just pointing out to us that D2 swept the podium in the Beetleweight at RoboGames 2016, which, in part, was something that was quite discouraging to see, you know, the domination of a single design, but it was also quite nice to see 3 kids on the podium.
I think on the topic of a domination of a single design, I don't think that's too dissimilar from the domination of horizontal spinners for a bit, or the domination of a certain type of weapon, you know? Like, I know that it's not... I get funny looks from Ryan. I think if you've got a tournament where you have one style of robot that's completely dominating, it's a signifier that you need to maybe rethink the robot that you're building.
I cannot think, and I should point out, I've turned directly to face Sam, which is very unusual here. I cannot think of a single grand final of any televised heavyweight competition in the modern era that has had 2 of the same type of robot in it. The only time we got close was Tombstone versus Bombshell, where Bombshell also ran their horizontal setup. But that was just a tactical choice based on the versions they had available to try and snipe a single weakness on the opponent. Other than that, in Robot Wars, it's been exclusively spinner versus flipper. In BattleBots, it's been horizontal versus wedge lifter sort of deal. And this time round, I suppose, 2 different types of vertical.
How different? I don't know. Right. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is that if you've got, like, the current meta in heavyweight stuff is spinners of some variety, right? They're sort of like the common thing. And so you sort of, you know, you can sort of think you're going to get a spinner in the final. You're going to get at least one in the final, or like in the sort of final few rounds and stuff. I just sort of think there's, maybe it's not exactly the same, but I think there is an analogy there between, you know, you've got a field of potentially very varied robots that basically gets whittled down to, off, like you said, robots, and every time it's a spinner versus a flipper. Like, they're all that is the meta, spinner or flipper, and or wedge flipper, I guess, to be more technical. But like, when you know that that's the meta, and if you're unhappy with that meta, then maybe that's a sign that you need to start thinking about trying to design robots more around that. I don't know how to sort of express what I'm trying to do. I just think it's a bit much to be like, it's completely unjust that there's 3 of the same design of robot in that are dominating. I know it's exactly the same robot, but like, it just doesn't seem too dissimilar to me to the current meta in heavyweight stuff.
To be fair, that hits upon the other point that was made, which is basically that the D2 is not an invincible machine. It's just good against the current meta. Non-meta designs can do very well against it. Anything that's attacking from overhead, they're quite weak on top. Any sort of control bot can do very well against them as well. So you're right in that it is partly a meta issue. I just disagree more with your analysis of what the heavyweight meta is.
That's fair enough.
And also, when we talk about the heavyweight meta, we're mostly talking about tournaments that ban wedges.
Yeah.
And they do that for a very good reason, which is that if you look at RoboGames, the wedges do very well.
Yeah.
Again, I have nothing against wedge fights. I think there are some excellent, excellent wedge fights. I would love to see something like Duck versus Stinger. That would be a great battle to me. They've both got active weapons of a sort, but they're mostly solid brick wedges. You know, we all enjoy watching Free Shipping as well, which is a wedge that's had its wedge taken off. It's not the design that is the problem. It's having 3 identical robots that is the problem.
Yeah.
But again, it does present an opportunity to some people as well. If you want to come in with a D2 killer, there are ways to do that. It's just that, again, certainly in America, I think in the UK, we've got a bigger range of Beetleweight designs. I think that's been very well demonstrated by Bogglebots. In America, however, there is a big focus on Build-A-Spinner. And that is obviously just the culture of competition they have, where they value the big destructive designs. And I think a lot of spectators would probably prefer that as well. I like variety. You like variety. But that is the way it is out there, so the D2 can dominate.
Yeah.
Anyway, we are probably now covering old ground. Anything else to say on the Kitbot issue?
No.
Good. In that case, we can move on and consider that case closed. No case is ever closed. How do we start on that Bogglebots Grand Final?
I don't know. Bogglebots has finished now. All the main episodes have aired. They've promised that there are some bonus ones coming.
Which I am greatly looking forward to, because it finally clears up what they were talking about when they said about a 5-way rumble and a 10-way rumble.
Yes.
The 10-way rumble was apparently not part of the competition and is still to come, and I cannot wait for it.
Yep.
The 5-way itself was an event.
Yeah.
Who were you hoping would come out of it?
You got to remind me who was in it.
So, we had Clause 2. We had Snappy. We had Drizzle. We had Sore Loser. And we had Maximum Overdrive. Mini Saw Blaze.
I thought SCD was in that. Or was that in a different one?
Nope, they were straight into the
they
final.
were straight into. Oh, yes.
They won their heat against all odds.
I don't know, really. I don't know who I really wanted to see.
I was really, really strongly hoping for Maximum Overdrive or Sore Loser. Purely because it would have upset the meta a little bit.
Yeah.
And, case closed. I was kind of looking at that as who has the best chance of beating Captain Doom. And by extension, Limpet, to be fair. You know, who has the best chance of beating the Wedges was my thinking going into that. And I saw those two as having the best chance rather than another wedge, albeit a very good wedge. If either Clause 2 or Snappy went through, both very good machines. Drizzle I kind of forgot was there and didn't expect it to run for nearly as long as it did.
No, I don't think anyone else did either.
But it certainly contributed to the fight.
Yeah, no, Drizzle's cool, as ever.
Drizzle's the kind of non-competitive design that I think we need in the world. It's highly unlikely to win anything, but boy, is it going to entertain you while it loses.
It's not going to win anything, but it is going to have something of an influence over who does win.
Yeah, which would be enough for me, I know that. I was obviously quite quickly disappointed in terms of my two favourites being the first two out.
Yep.
But what a death for Sore Loser. Maximum Overdrive getting the saw to its full depth.
And cutting through, what do they cut through, like a wire to the motor or something?
Cut through the wires, I believe it was, into 2 of the 3 speed controllers. So it had one for left drive, one for weapon drive, and one for right drive. It took out left side and weapon in one cut.
Yes.
The most beautiful moment of Sawbot work you will ever see.
It's a shame that the particular camera they used at that point was the one that was furthest away from them. I don't know if they had one that was closer to that action. I think they did because they used it a bit later on. But in the main sort of broadcast of that moment, I think there was something else happening with Drizzle, and so that's sort of where my focus was at the time that was happening. It wasn't until afterwards that I sort of, when they went back in like the replay bit, that I sort of realised exactly what had happened there.
I think they had a couple of angles, but one of them was possibly obscured by the side wall, or just obscured by the shower of sparks. But man, that was the slow brutality of a saw at its very, very best.
Oh, I'm glad you got to see that.
Where's
my crusher?
I was so happy. I cannot describe how happy I was in that moment, even though it'd taken out my other favourite. It's just such a great moment. And people often say that great moments don't necessarily make great fights. That justified that fight in itself for me. Do we need to say about the sort of drama of the end, or is that obvious enough?
I think it's obvious enough.
Yeah. To be fair, I thought Clause 2 deserved to go through, and was only a couple of seconds of doing so, but so happy to see Craig go through.
Yeah, it is a shame for... we'll talk about it anyway. It is a shame for Clause 2, but, like, you know, that's how these fights go, really, isn't it? It's sort of like, you know, if if you get pitted, even if it is 2 seconds before the end or whatever it was, then you're out and that's it.
Whereas sitting still for half the fight and getting moving again right at the end, that's fine. I was desperately hoping for a real Rumble controversy, but we just didn't get it.
No.
So that leaves us with SCD, Rev 2, Snappy, Captain Doom, Limpet, and K2 in the final.
Mm-hmm.
Are we happy to run through them?
I don't know what you want to run through them in terms of, but go for it.
I don't know either.
We've spoken about SCD before, haven't we? And I still like it. The way, I mean, I don't know what fights in particular, I can't remember the specifics of all the fights, but the way that Limpet put it in the pit was just astonishing.
Oh. It was never really a contender for the title.
No.
You know, it was always going to face an uphill battle because of the kind of robot it is. And it put up a really good fight against Limpet, which is the worst matchup it could have.
Mm.
But again, the driving from Limpet was superb. Basically just potting it in the pit.
That was very good. But yeah, SED is always entertaining to watch, I think. I expressed this last time. Melty Brains, I really like them.
SED, in a sense, has had the perfect run in that it's shown off all of its strengths and then lost because of the weakness that they will have known it had and could do nothing about.
Yeah.
That's the way you want to come out of a tournament. It's done everything it could and possibly a little more. So yeah, so much time for SCD. Talking of going out in ways that you know are a problem, Rev 2. That's a bad way to go.
Oh, dear. Yeah, upside down.
I must admit, when I first saw Rev 2, I didn't give it that much of a chance. Because anytime you see anytime I see a really boxy robot like that, I kind of worry for it. Because it looks like there are so many places that any spinner could get a really good bite. But the undercutter itself had so much power that it's kind of pushed itself through. Obviously, its final fight here, well, not its final fight, it still had the melee, but its final fight against Snappy did not show off what it could do at all. But the rest of the time, it really did show what it could do.
Yeah, good little robot.
Although it is the Slayer of Maximum Overdrive, so I have to take away points for that.
Oh dear.
Snappy. So much time for Snappy.
Snappy. A robot that, am I right in thinking this? It can't self-right?
Admittedly, that is an issue, but it can run inverted, so that's fine.
Can't self-right. And the commentators can't tell if its weapon is firing or if it's being hit up by the beater, which is very clearly hitting the wedge.
Yeah, admittedly, that was a little... yeah. As wedges go, it is the most acceptable wedge because it is also a lifter. And it has jazzy lights. What more do you need?
It's jazzy lights that come up its drive.
I forgot about that.
What I loved about that is the solution there was tape down the lights a bit more firmly this time, rather than what I would have done in that situation, which was take the lights off.
No. That is not an option.
Well, it's I massive respect for doing that. Obviously, that's the right choice. Obviously, taking the lights off is a silly thing to do, but it's what I would have done in the situation. So I'm glad that it was like, no, we need to put the lights back on and do it better this time.
No, that's why I love Snappy doing so well. You've got someone who is talented but not over competitive, whose talent is able to show through.
Yeah.
That's what you always want. You know, someone who isn't taking themselves too seriously but can succeed anyway.
Yeah.
Because he's built something really good. No, really meta in a sense, but still does it with a sense of fun that makes it stand out so far above other similar designs.
Yeah.
Beaten at its own game by Captain Doom, but what are you going to do? That was a hell of a fight.
Yeah.
Speaking of Captain Doom, kind of a victim of the cumulative damage from the K2 fight, really.
Yeah, they got their wheel taken off in the end, didn't they? And that kind of what did it for them in the final moments. It is. I think we've probably spoken enough about about Captain Doom in other areas of this thing.
Well, no, we haven't spoken about Captain Doom. We've spoken about kits.
That's true.
We were very intentionally not talking about Captain Doom.
So Captain Doom has like those forks and stuff, which are really cool. I'm assuming they're the bits that are custom.
I believe so. The other wedges that you use against K2, I believe, are a kit option.
Okay. But like the 4 fork things going across are pretty cool. I like the way they look, and obviously they're articulated so that the other way up they're still on the ground and stuff like that. It's a cool addition.
And again, it shows the value of being a good tactician as well as a good driver.
Yeah.
That he has consistently made the right choices in the way he set his robot up. Obviously, the thing with the wheel is maybe a bit of a deficiency in the pits, but what you're going to do? Although I think Limpet was given way too much credit for knocking that wheel off. I think the Lance just happened to be near it at the time.
Yeah, I think that wheel was coming off anyway. I quite like that the kid doesn't go for the pit, actually. I sort of like, they're all framing in terms of, oh, he's from America, he's not used to it. I'm sure like he could use the pit to his advantage if he wanted to. But I do appreciate that he's sort of not going to go for it. But if it is opened, he'll still use it and stuff. Like he does a very good job of, oh, it's open now, so he does put robots in it and stuff.
If the other person opens it, he'll use it against them.
Yeah. But yeah, I kind of appreciate, because I've always had very mixed feelings about pits and stuff, like
yeah,
because it's sort of like, on the one hand, it is kind of like a staple of British combat robotics and all that, and it's sort of quite useful for shortening fights that would otherwise be quite long and boring. But then it is also, in its own way, brings about very boring fights in that it just cuts interesting fights very short sometimes, or it's a bit too. I don't know. I don't enjoy watching lots of fights where the pit is opened as soon as it can possibly be opened, and then that's it and stuff. So it's sort of, you know, I appreciate that there's variety here. That you've got this kid who's like, I'm not going to open it, and will win in other ways. You know, he got, what was it, K2 out of the arena
using their own weapon.
Yeah. So that's cool to see, and obviously they've got the power to overturn other robots by just driving at them quickly enough or ramming into walls and stuff. So it's just, I appreciate that.
As a viewer, most of the time I like the pit. As a competitor, I despise the pit. I do think that in this weight class in particular, with the size of arena you have, you need a smaller pit than this. That pit is a much larger percentage of the floor space than it would be in a heavyweight arena.
I think that's
but
true.
It still needs to be big enough for robots to go down. So it's a tricky balancing act.
That is the tricky thing. It is interesting that scaling affects the Antweight arena that we've looked at as well, where the pits on that are just massive, really. Yeah, they're just absolutely...
Especially when you can't drive, they get even bigger.
Just I don't know what you're on about. They're just utterly enormous. So yeah, it is. That's a tricky balance. But then if they were much smaller, then, you know, robots wouldn't fit in them. So just need a bigger arena.
I think a good balancing act would be, instead of the pit being available from the 30-second mark, have it available from the halfway mark. I think that would add a little more balance.
Yeah.
And again, if we want rules that nerf the wedges, that kind of is one as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, overall, I'm really glad that Tyler was able to get a sort of podium position in this. Because regardless of the robot, the most talented people should rise to the top. And in driving terms, he clearly is one of those. At the same time, very glad a kit didn't win. I'm not going to hide that fact. Very, very glad. Then on to the finalists. We've spoken about it a lot already because it's been a big player in the whole tournament, Limpet.
Yeah, it's another very well-driven, very robust wedge robot. They're always going to do well if you meet those criteria, really.
Yeah. Excellent driving, excellent reliability as well. And by far the most consistent performer.
Yeah, they definitely seem to come out of a lot of fights without a lot of damage or like very quick repairs and stuff. So it is a very tough robot, I think, because they took on some reasonably heavy hitters, I feel, and like didn't come out of it too badly.
Yeah, they had SCD and took some minor damage to what I think was ablative armor. They took on K2 and went the whole distance. I can't think of what other damaging robot they would have gone up against.
I think you probably covered the ones that I had on that I was thinking of. So,
because the more damaging robots tended to come up in the later heats. So I think they came up earlier.
Yeah,
they may have had mini. I'm going to embarrass myself by not knowing who was where.
Let's not go there. Point is, robust little robot.
Yeah. Once it got through to the final, I was convinced it was going to be the champion. Honestly, I think 7 or 8 times out of 10 it wins that matchup. But this was one of the 2 or 3.
Yeah.
And a great, great fight.
Oh yeah, that was a really good fight, really good grand final in general.
I've got to say, K2 isn't a robot that grabbed my interest and attention when it first came up. Which is funny, because I love betas.
Yeah, what's going on here?
But boy, did it prove itself on the way through.
Captain Inconsistent again. Yes, no, that's a really good robot. I really liked that.
I thought they were super unlucky to lose to Captain Doom. Absolutely deserved to get back in through the Rumble. And then that final. We'd seen hints of the driving ability earlier, but the drive in that final was incredible.
Yes, and like the tactics as well of like, you know, once K2 had flipped Limpet, then being like, I'm going to turn the weapon off for a bit and just try and control that fight. Because like there's enough drive in K2 that it can push other robots about. So it's a really interesting middle ground of sort of push bot, control bot type thing, but there's also quite a mean weapon on it. And it's interesting to see that, yeah, rather than sort of like what the typical use of that weapon would be, which would be full power all the time and just try and obliterate them, it's to sort of be like, I'm going to use it tactically, flip them over. And it's like, well, at this point, I don't really want them back the right up again and using that. And it's, yeah, really very, very cool. And some really amazingly tense moments with the driving when they're especially with Limpet upside down, they're quite evenly matched in terms of pushing power. There's quite a few moments where they're just locked head to head and not really moving. And a few moments when they're like that right next to the pit and you're like, how'd you get out of that? And it's, yeah, so good.
I can't remember if it was this fight or the Captain Doom fight. I feel like it must have been this one. Where K2 was on the edge of the pit facing it and trying to reverse.
Yeah.
And you could see that the tyres were constantly getting a little bit of grip on the leading edge of the inverted wedge and almost driving up it.
Yeah.
And it was just bouncing around on the edge, and any second it could have just lost traction and completely gone. Such a good final.
Yeah.
You happy with the decision?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, that's fair. I'd have been happy whichever way they gave it, to be honest.
Yeah.
I think it was so close.
It was definitely.
They couldn't have got that decision wrong.
It was definitely a really close fight. It could have gone. Yeah, it could have gone either way. I do think that K2 did deserve that, though, because it's sort of, I guess, I don't know, just almost like a recognition of the extra level of thinking about what to do with his weapon and that kind of thing. It's just sort of, yeah, I don't know. I just think he had a little something extra.
Yeah, and you do need small margins to divide it in that kind of situation. Yeah, fair play. I think that grand final episode has perfectly completed what has been a pure upward trajectory in terms of the entertainment value of the episodes. Is that a controversial statement?
It's not.
Would you like me to rephrase
It's
that?
not a controversial statement. It's a statement that I think possibly leads us into our next topic quite well. I think it's been a constant upward trend in the entertainment of the fights.
Yes,
That
is a much better way of putting it.
I'm not sure I'd characterise the upward trend, characterise the entertainment of the entire series as an upward trend, for me personally.
Yeah, that's fair. I think you've captured what I was trying to say better, really. So, shall I now go into my pre-prepared statement?
Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about the show in general, and yeah, Ryan has an opening statement.
So yeah, over the life of this podcast, we've always given a fairly frank review of every series that we're covering. And we really want this to be no different. The thing is, of course, it is different because what we're doing here is talking about something that was made by a team of volunteers rather than some faceless, multi-million-pound, multi-million-dollar production company. So it does feel a bit different, but ultimately, we want this to be a series that continues and thrives. We want it to become the best series it can possibly be. So we are going to go through talking about not only what we really enjoyed, but also some things that we think can be improved. With that out of the way, that almost sets us up on a I'm worried that sets us up on a negative footing. That's not what this is at all.
Okay, I can fix this. I've got an opening statement of my own.
Okay.
Yeah, which is Bugglebots was really good.
Yeah.
Like, really, really good. I got to the end of it and, like, you know, almost wanted to give applause to the people that made it because you've done such a great job for the whole series. It is, yeah, it's really good.
I was really worried that I'd hyped myself up too much for it and that I'd set a bar that was unachievably high, and it cleared that bar. It cleared that bar comfortably. It is an absolute triumph of what this community can achieve. And I hate using the term, this community. There's something about it that really irks me, but it's the only way to describe what is happening here, because this is a community effort.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing about criticism is that there are many things in the world that are terrible, but they're not worth criticizing. I think there's an idea of something has to reach a certain level to be worth criticizing in any meaningful way, I think. And so
I like to characterize what this is as critique rather than criticism, which is a very small difference, but I hope quite an important one.
Yes, right. We should probably start talking about it rather than...
Yeah, the more we qualify this, the more it sounds like we're about to dismantle everything.
Just keep edging.
We'll start off with the production. Camera work and editing, I think, has been consistently great.
Yeah. If you compare how followable the fights in this are to the fights in Series 8 of Robot Wars, the first of the reboot.
Yeah, and Series 9, I'd say, as well. Series
9, like if you just like how easy is it to follow the fight? This versus those, night and day difference. It's so easy to see what's going on in the edits of these fights.
Yeah, the fight editing in particular has been flawless. I've also enjoyed... I am a bit of a camera work nerd. It's something I try and hide. But I've really enjoyed the little intermixing with some handheld stuff. Some sort of stuff from across the room. That gives a feeling that I really like. It gives me a sort of warm feeling.
Yeah.
It's sort of an inclusive feeling almost. I think they've done a really good job of capturing a sense that you are almost there. Yeah. You're basically there, but with the best seat in the house.
Yeah, because they have shots across the audience, and it sort of captures the feel of that room, and it also like reminds you a lot of the scale of what's going on, both in terms of like the physical scale of the robots, but also just the scale of the event and stuff. So it's just nice little reminders, nice little touches there of, this is a reasonably small but like well thought out thing.
And they've also used the stuff in the pits really, really well. If anything, I'd like to see more of that. I love any behind the scenes stuff. I love seeing people in particular getting together in the pits afterwards, looking at each other's robots. That's the stuff that they've managed to capture as well. So really, really pleased with that.
Yeah.
The next thing I personally wanted to pick out was the graphics that have been really well done. No, not like that.
Says the guy that helped with them.
I did the smallest amount and someone animated them to be far better than they were when I made them. What I was thinking about more was, the fight card graphics have been really good. Even stuff like the posters they've been putting out ahead of episodes, superb stuff. Only thing I would ditch potentially is some of the green screen segments where I think the lighting was quite a bit off and they haven't quite worked. But I can very easily see how that might have been something that only became clear once they got into the edit. And at that point, the stuff that you've recorded on the green screen is going to be quite hard to replace. And you can't just leave the green screen in the background and go, oh, we didn't quite like that, right? So I can see how they maybe backed into a corner using that. That's such a small piece of criticism.
Yeah, I guess the specific with the green screen stuff is just when you're talking about lighting is that you end up with like the person is really, really low contrast, which is especially odd against like everything else is graphics and quite high contrast, and it really stands out. They look really washed out and grey almost.
Green screen lighting is really hard as well. You basically need two sets of lights with two different colour temperatures to do it properly.
Yeah.
Because you need lighting that makes the green consistent, and then you need lighting of the person that complements their skin tones and doesn't leave shadows on the green. It's a nightmare to do really well. I would say, personally, I just don't attempt it. Never try green screen. Green screen is awful. Don't do it.
Yeah.
There's two sort of quite big things that I think for me would be the focus to improve next time. The first one is sound. I think because the interviews were reliant on a single handheld condenser mic, quite a lot got missed. Where the interviewer and the interviewee are both talking at once, there's a bit of confusion about who to point it at. I think really simple fix for that, if they sort of have the equipment, budget, whatever, just give your interviewer a lav mic and let them use their handheld mic purely for what the other person is saying. Just cleans it up, gives you quite a lot of options as well when you are doing the sound mix afterwards. Yeah, it's like us recording on the two mics. You can do a surprising amount of editing if you need to.
Yeah. My other sort of point about sound, there's just sort of I want to understand why in the interviews straight after the fight, and I forget the guy's name. Bob.
It sounds like I'm making it up.
That does sound like you're making it. I'm giving you side eye because I'm not sure if you're having me on here.
No, Bob Horton. Nice guy.
There's him with the handheld mic that he's waving backwards and forwards, and then there's also a guy with like a big boom, like a shotgun mic overhead. Now, I would have thought, having never made a series like this before in my life, that the shotgun mic is what you'd be using for the sound. And I don't know why Bob had a microphone at all. My guess, and I'd love to know if I'm right or wrong, is that the intent was that microphone was like mainly for like live to the audience in the room, but you recorded it just in case, and then the sound from the shotgun wasn't what you wanted, possibly? I don't know. I don't understand why they're both there. I don't know if you have any hypotheses, Ryan, but I don't get it.
If it were me, I would have been using that boom mic largely as backup. If you can get a reasonably clean recording of all sound, you have got a lovely backup to fall upon if the audio from the other mic isn't what you want it to be. The issue with that is that they're such different styles of sound that you can't mix them very easily.
Yeah.
So I feel like, other people have different approaches to this. People with more experience probably have better approaches than me, because I gave up on filmmaking when I was about 18. My assumption is that they had that there as backup and intended to use the condenser mics as the main sound. I don't see why you'd have PA in what is a fairly small venue.
No, it's just a theory that sort of occurred to me just before we started recording. But yeah, that's my question to anyone who may know. It's like, why are there two microphones there?
Yeah, I would imagine that the audio that came from the boom mics would have been really useful for ambience, but not good for direct speech. Because that's what you tend to get out of boom mics in those situations. The audio from the condenser, even if you have missed little bits because you're pointing it at the wrong person, is still going to be better than that boom mic sound.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, I'm guessing the people that did this have more experience than me and therefore make better decisions than I would have.
Yeah.
But yeah, for me, that really simple fix, specifically on the audio for interviews, would elevate this a long, long way. I think people really underestimate the importance of sound.
It's the most important part of video.
It is, yeah. Although not for fights. For fights, the video probably matters more.
Well, I think for fights, I still think the sound is the most important thing. I just don't think it's as important that it's accurate sound. I think it's very reasonable to augment the sound that you record a little for the purposes of making it more entertaining. Because I think if you compare, because with BattleBots we have a direct comparison. We have fights on YouTube that have just the raw arena audio, and then we have the fights that are televised. And the difference in the sort of excitement and the tension and just the genuine entertainment is huge, because the sound that they mix for the televised ones is different, and it's not necessarily a fully faithful representation of the sounds that were there, but it is the one that sort of sounds the best.
It's an idealised version. So with BattleBots, I think they do add some effects on the in-arena sound. They also layer over what is either the real audience sound or some generic audience sound, doesn't really matter which, and then you've got the commentary on top of it as well, which in BattleBots in particular is very high-paced.
Yeah.
What you don't want is Robot Wars Series 8, with the horrible metal-on-metal sound when Carbide's bar hits Nuts' plastic wheels. I would say I agree. Augmenting the battle sound is a really useful thing, but it's probably a lot of work.
Yeah, definitely.
A lot of work.
Unquestionably a lot of work.
So yeah, that isn't something I'm going to say, you need to do this for season 2.
No.
Although, if someone wants to do that, brilliant, yeah, that'll add a lot. I should point out, I'm criticising sound, sat here as the guy nearly 50 episodes into a podcast who still hasn't bought a mic stand or pop filter.
Yep.
Sorry, pop filter.
God damn it.
The second thing I would point out as a focus to improve, and this is far more subjective, is the pacing of episodes. I personally, as someone that likes things to be quite bang, 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 would probably have dropped quite a lot of the interviews. I think the very rigid format of having every interview in place at times has slowed things down a bit.
Yeah, it's very rigidly like 3 sets of interviews per fight. It's like there's the interview with all the teams involved before the fight. There's the interview immediately after the fight. And then I guess it's maybe not every time, but there's very often a sort of random snippet from either the hallway or the pits of someone talking to, like, obviously answering a question that was asked off camera and that. And I feel like there's room for merging these things together. I think if it were me, I would... Sorry, Bob. I'd drop that bit. I'd drop the bit straight after the fight and merge it. Maybe not drop it completely, but like merge that with the bits in the pits. Maybe put Bob in the pits or something. I don't know. I don't know exactly what I do, but like I feel like there's room there for at the very least squashing those 2 things together.
I like having stuff immediately after the fight. I like having those sort of quick fire reactions from people. That is the piece of interview that I value most. I also think it's really important to have them at the beginning of the show to introduce each robot. Everyone needs to get that chance to talk about their machine. I would say that between fights, you don't necessarily need them as much, because what tends to happen is that really, because the situation is the same every time, you're asking roughly the same questions every time, you're getting roughly the same answers. That is inevitable. So if you can drop the ones in the middle where everything's kind of the same, using those sort of ad hoc questions in the pits is brilliant. I really like what BattleBots do as well, with a little overlay in the bottom corner before a fight. Mm-hmm. Which is a great way to pick out one question from a longer interview without it seeming disjointed.
Yep.
So I think that's something that can be streamlined quite a lot. I really like the idea of sort of doing more of it in the pits as well.
Yeah.
As I've already said, I'm a fan of stuff in the pits.
So I wonder if maybe a good approach would be like interview before the fight the first time they're on in an episode, but then that's it. And then like a slightly higher paced thing after every fight, maybe. Would that be a good balance for you, do you reckon?
I wouldn't really frame it that rigidly.
Yeah.
I'd basically say, do all of the interviews and keep ones that are really interesting.
Yeah.
You know, there are some people there who are going to give you an interesting interview every time, and you're going to find yourself with material that you do not want to drop from an edit. Because those people will be funny and engaging and adding so much in their interview. And you don't want to miss out on that. So you do all the interviews and you see what stuff you get, but you don't need to tie yourself to a very rigid format of we're going to show all of these.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough.
And I think because you've got 2 really good commentators there as well, I think they can almost take over some of the presenting load in terms of linking into fights. And that gives you so much more flexibility. Because the commentary is being done in post, you can put something together that would seem a bit disjointed without those interviews, and you can use the commentators as kind of the water carriers to voice over stuff that brings it all together again.
Yeah, I think one of the things that occurred to me when I was watching, I think, the final was there are moments in those fights when there's a bit of confusion about what's happened to a robot in the moment. And I think because the commentary is done after the fact, and because the commentary is done after you've got all the interviews and stuff, and you've got the information on what happened, I feel like there's room for having the commentators explain. I know maybe that would just feel really weird, but having the commentators explain what's happened to a robot, like say, oh, they must have cut through the wires for the drive or something at that moment, rather than leaving for an interview. Maybe that's a stupid idea.
No, I like that, and I think that's an advantage of having a 2-person commentary team instead of 1. Jonathan Pierce does that a lot, and it's really obvious.
Yeah.
Because he's just going, oh, it looks like this has happened. Whereas if you've got the 2 of them there going, you know, having a discussion about it, sort of, oh, what do you think's happened there? Oh, maybe it was this.
Yeah.
Especially because you've got a commentary team that is a quite experienced roboteer and someone who is more commentary-based, has also competed, but less so. You can always frame them as, oh, I'm going to go to this person because they've probably been in this situation or something similar.
Yeah.
Which might as well, while we're here, the commentary has been really good. Really good. Again, Jonathan Pierce is someone who is essential to Robot Wars, but he's not good. He's part of the fabric, but he's not actually that good at commentating. This is good commentary. It's easy to forget how much that adds.
Yeah.
Anything more on production from you before we go on to competition?
Well, I have a few more thoughts on pacing in general.
Do it.
The thing that coming into this, I sort of said I think the fights have become more entertaining, but I think the overall level maybe has leveled off towards the end of it for me. I'm very willing to throw my hands up and say that I just have a short attention span and this is my problem. But I skipped a lot of stuff that wasn't the fights towards the end. An interesting one that I want to talk with you about specifically is the interviews with the judges, because we've spoken a number of times about how frustrating it is that the judges never explain their decisions. And in this series, I believe the judges explained it every time.
Mm.
And I skipped it every time. And I want to know what you think of that.
I love how you're commenting on it, having not watched it.
Well, this is what the conversation is, though. Is that I think we've both said that would be a really good idea. And I think I got about halfway through the first one of them and then went, no, this isn't for me. And I skipped on to the next fight. So I'm just like, did you watch them all? I assume you did.
I did, yeah. I watched everything. Although,
Yeah.
admittedly, on rewatches, I did skip stuff, which I don't often do.
So, like, what? I don't know if you have any thoughts on those judges things in particular.
I've been a big proponent of letting the judges explain themselves, and having seen it done, I still am. I think it maybe fell a little bit into the BattleBots trap of here are people who are having to make decisions based on quite a rigid formula, who are then talking about the decision in very subjective terms.
Mm.
I would prefer if those conversations were, I gave these points this way, and so on. That's what I would personally like. But I am one viewer. I don't know if this sort of conversation is what people prefer. I would definitely keep doing it. I think especially because you don't get as many judges' decisions at this weight class, I think it's worth giving that time over. And also, let's face it, they're not tied down to a runtime. This is a YouTube video. They've been a fairly consistent length, but they can be whatever they are.
Yeah. I wonder if for the judges thing, I wonder if you could get that information across in a graphic with some other audio going. Like a graphic of how the judges scored it, and then maybe have the audio from one of the judges talking. Because I think the thing that got me was that they interviewed every judge every time, I think. Or at least they certainly interviewed it the first time I watched it, and I think it was like halfway through the second that I got bored of it, or whatever it was. But like I get the impression they interviewed the judges every time, like all three of the judges every time, which felt a bit repetitive to me. So I wonder if maybe just for the purposes of pacing, a graphic with the scores and the audio from one of the interviews, maybe.
I don't know why we've never thought of a judges' scores graphic before. To be fair, old BattleBots did it and it was clearly just made up numbers, but given that it's being done, certainly in BattleBots on a numerical basis, I would be completely in favour of that in every series.
Yeah.
That is one of the best ideas you've ever suggested.
Yes. And my final point on pacing, just because I'm fussy. You mentioned about runtime. There is no limit, and you're right, there is no limit. They can do whatever they want. I think 40 minutes is too long.
I was surprised to see how long they were, but not at all disappointed.
I wonder, though, if they went for a 30-minute runtime, if that would force a lot of these decisions about pacing, I think. Because obviously you're not going to cut the fight to make that runtime, so the time's got to come from other places. And I wonder if that would... force rethought about the way all the interviews work and all that kind of stuff. But that's just me. Like I said, I'm fully willing to be like, I have no attention span and I don't represent the audience. I don't know. It's just there. That's just the way I am. I skipped quite a lot of the final, like because that was an hour and a bit long.
Yeah, but it did have.
It had one extra fight and an extra 20 minutes of content, which is fine. Like I'm fine with I don't mind. Obviously, again, there's no limitations on the format here, so obviously make the final longer. It's a special thing, but I skipped an awful lot of that. I felt bad doing it, but
I think the difference between us on pacing is that I tend to watch it live while chatting about it with the chat on YouTube.
Yeah.
Which means that when there are slower moments, that's almost a break, so you can get into that and see what's going on. So I suppose that's maybe where the difference of opinion is.
Yeah.
I think in the past I've been slightly more pro-fluff than you.
Yeah.
I would always choose more action over less action, but because none of the fluff in this is taking the place of a fight, I'm more okay with it.
Yeah.
And again, with it being a YouTube thing, I think that does kind of change the equation slightly, in that it's so easy to skip if you're not interested in that stuff. But I would still be a proponent of increasing the pace a bit.
Yeah.
I realised I've contradicted myself massively in that closing thing.
That's not like you at all.
No, I'd never do that.
Once again, I want to say, Bogglebots was really good, including all of the production. Like, it is really good.
Yeah. One of the things that always happens when we do this is that the criticism is always really specific and therefore takes longer.
Yeah.
All of our praise for this is kind of vague and hand-wavy almost, because it was just really good. Yeah, moving on. Competition format.
Yep.
I did not think I was going to like this format as much as I did.
No, I didn't understand it for a while, and then I got it, and it's good. It's fine. Yeah.
The only question I would raise is how it was decided which robot faces the one that came out of the melee, which is theoretically maybe a slightly easier fight. Because they had that with the grand final in particular. You know, there's 5 heat winners plus 1 heat runner-up who faces the heat runner-up.
Yeah.
Well, that's such a small thing. Again, that's me getting in my, ooh, I like a bracket kind of headspace. I could have suggested so many other formats for this, but I think anything I would suggest that's better would require having more teams and more robots, which, you know, practically speaking, probably not that viable.
Yeah, and I liked the format. Like like I said, I got it. It made sense. It was consistent every time. You had a clear sense of what was about to happen. You knew what you were building up to. You're building up to this. You know, you're going to see each episode winner all fighting and stuff. So like, you knew what you were building towards. I think maybe a bit of, I don't know if, I can't remember if they talked about it in the first episode, but I don't know if they ever did like a quick overview of how the format works.
They did as a separate video.
So I wonder if that would have been worth sort of including in episode 1 or something. Just a quick rundown of, we're going to do, you know, every episode is going to consist of these fights, these melees, whatever. The final episode is going to be a rumble to decide whatever, and then so on. You know, I think that would have been nice, and then I wouldn't have had to have pieced it together from watching the episodes.
Yeah. I think the assumption there was maybe that this is so similar to the sort of Robot Wars Series 10 format that most people were going to get it anyway.
Yeah.
But I agree. Making it clear, doing the sort of housekeeping would have been handy.
Yeah, but I mean the format of the competition, absolutely fine. I wouldn't ask them to make any changes.
Yeah, this is almost an improvement on the Series 10 format, where you're still giving everybody 2 fights, but you've got more of a focus on 1v1s.
Yeah.
You're minimising the amount of melees you have to do. You're keeping it a 1v1 tournament for the most part.
Yeah.
The only reason you're going to get involved in that suboptimal situation of a melee is if you lose a fight. So yeah, absolutely nailed it on format. Final thing then would be the robots.
Yeah.
What do you make of the field overall?
I think it was all really good. There's a really good mix of designs, of ideas. There's like big differences in terms of, I'm going to sound so harsh again, in terms of like the whatever the equivalent of production value is for building a robot. You know, there's stuff that's a bit more hand built by people that haven't built very much before, all the way up to stuff 3D printed out of exotic materials and stuff. Like there is that full range, and that's great to see. I think all the robots in general were good. Everyone who was involved should be proud of what they've done.
Yeah, you've got a really good range of experience and ambition levels.
Yeah.
From people like us who are sort of hacking bits of HDPE together, sticking some motors in and making something that works, and they're proud of that, to people that are out there, you know, armouring up in beryllium and all of that. Really good range. And again, it's done what Robot Wars always tried to do, but did in a really clunky way, of showing that this is kind of such a teacher term, kind of a low threshold, high ceiling sport, where you can get into it with minimal resources, but you can also take it to those extremes and spend days in CAD making something and get it printed the difficult way and do so much high-level stuff. The only limit is your budget and your imagination. It showcased that really well.
And the rules.
They're more of a guideline.
I think I mentioned it when we first talked about Bogglebots, is that watching this has made that feel so much more approachable than Robot Wars ever did, really.
Mm. And I couldn't help, she said that, just glance up at Split Decision over
Stop
there
it! Stop!
and imagine it larger.
You're a walking meme.
Just, it wouldn't have to be that much bigger. It's achievable.
I know.
I really want... I want to put in an application for Series 2. If you would be willing to go with me and do most of the difficult work because you have more skill than me.
I really don't think I do.
You can solder, I can't. It's a pretty key skill.
You could learn to solder.
I would actually, off topic, I would appreciate a soldering lesson sometime. I used to be able to do it and I've completely forgotten how it works.
Yeah, I will gladly show you.
But yeah, I mean, watch this space. We've got to. Got to put in a speculative application.
Yep.
And we'll be there to advise on sound and editing of it. Just follow a cameraman around going, oh, that's a bit out of focus.
Oh. We'd go there and everyone would be super critical of our robot.
Yeah, I hope they would. Especially if there's people there whose robots we've criticised in the past. I hope they're just there laughing in our faces when we lose.
This bolt is slightly misaligned. This welding is terrible.
What I know is why you chose to weld plastic. Don't know what you're doing.
Well, why wouldn't you weld plastic? Clearly that's the thing to do.
Solvent weld.
Yeah.
Something that we did kind of highlight is that, to me at least, how can I put this? It's not the quality of robot that went up as the series went. It was more the combinations of robots became more interesting as the series went on. I think we had quite a loaded couple of heats in Heat 4 and 5 in terms of the really different designs coming in. So Heat 5, for example, you had... What was there? There was a Sore Loser there. Mm-hmm. There was also Angst there as the kind of hyper-powerful axe. And there was Zero Gravitas there as a grabber. That maybe had the most variety of any. Mm-hmm. I think something that I would... And this is possibly knocking on the door of something I really don't like. Something that I think I criticised Robot Wars for. But I do wonder if there's something to kind of curating your heats to make sure there is a good variety in each one. The purist in me wants a random draw for every episode, but I think I'm really starting to see how that doesn't necessarily make for the best entertainment.
Yeah, it's always a really fine balance, and we've talked about it a lot in the time we've done this, about entertainment versus like a legitimate sporting competition. I haven't said that in a long time.
We haven't said that for ages.
Oh, that felt good.
It really did. It felt good to hear as well.
Legitimate sporting competition. There is that fine balance between those two things, because they're, often they go hand in hand. But there are definitely areas where you got to pick one or the other, and it's a hard line to walk.
And naturally, I'm going to change my mind on it every time we talk about it.
Yes, of course you are.
One thing I do wonder is whether they'll maybe go with seeding for next time. Now that they've got a competition under their belts, you'd hope that a lot of robots will try to return. And others that come in will probably be from the scene anyway. They'll be fairly known quantities. I do wonder if a seeding system might really work for next time.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure I like seeding very much.
Really?
I don't know why. I say I don't know why. I think it always felt very opaque to me about how the seeding got decided. I think it was very obvious for like the top 4 or 5. And then beyond that, it was just like someone's just picked a number out of thin air.
Yeah, that did come up for BattleBots a couple of seasons ago, didn't it? Where there were some interesting seeding decisions.
Yeah. That
seemed to be based more on the bracket they would produce than the positions they should be in.
Yeah.
I mean, what I mean when I say seeding really is, okay, we've got 5 heats. We're going to take the 5 top seeds and distribute them across those heats. Or maybe we take a top 10 and put 1 and 10 in one heat, 2 and 9 in another, and so on, or something like that. Just as a means of kind of distributing things. I agree, though, that it is open to debate that might not be helpful.
Yeah, I guess the problem, like you mentioned about like taking the top 5 seeds and spreading them out, you almost guaranteeing that those 5 will be the ones in the final. It's sort of like, maybe not guaranteeing, but you're improving the odds of that. And I guess the flip side of that is if you put them all in the same heat,
which is what Robot Wars did.
Yeah, you're guaranteeing that you're going to knock out 4 of the best robots or whatever. So it's sort of like, yeah, it's it's hard to pick what to do there.
The thing is, arguably, the 5 robots, or the 6 robots in this case, that make a final are very rarely going to be objectively the 6 best. There's always an element of the matchups you've got.
Yeah.
So just because you're putting the number 4 seed in a heat against a bunch of unseeded robots doesn't mean that there's not going to be 2 or 3 designs in there that they will really struggle to combat.
Yeah.
You know, it'd be like putting Nuts 2 against a field of entirely wedge flippers. Yeah, Nuts 2, a robot that made a grand final, would not be making that grand final that year.
Yeah.
And that's an extreme example, but I hope it illustrates what I'm getting at.
Nuts 2 versus a field of D2s.
Scaled up or kept at the same size?
I think the same size would be even funnier. Still wouldn't win.
It would never be able to hit them. It could run them over aggressively. Anything else as a closing statement on Bugglebots in general, apart from it was great, which we've already said quite a few times?
Bugglebots was really good.
What's really good?
I enjoyed it. Please make another one.
Why set your sights on just one, Sam?
Please make at least one more. Don't mysteriously be not renewed for some reason.
No, genuinely, you know, people have put a huge amount of work into this. I would completely understand if they felt they didn't want to do that again. So I think it's also worth saying, yeah, anyone out there that feels like they can get involved and help with it, yeah, anyone with technical skills that could be of value, you know, step forward. Let's make this happen again, and let's put it in a position where it can be even bigger.
The thing that I've seen the Bugglebots people tweeting about is getting in contact with companies that might be able to sponsor them. They had a sponsor in, was it like Rapid Electronics or something, that would have helped a lot. And if they can get more sponsors for that show, then that'd be good. So if you work at any of these companies, or you're the CEO of those companies, or you have any level of influence, then you know what to do. But we want to see more. That is the end point to end all endpoints, I think. You can find the show notes for this episode at spinnerproof.com/episodes/45. There you can find links to all the things we've been talking about today. You can also find a link to our Twitter at Spinnerproof, where you can tweet to us your favourite SpaceX rocket. Way! Who would do the ad reads if we did advertising? We'd have to share them. I would quite enjoy doing an ad read. This episode's been brought to you by Triangle Zone. What? It's like Squarespace, but not. This episode comes to you from Jim's Razors. Oh, dear. They send you razors. Oh, dear. Do you use a VPN? Oh, God, what would that one be? Who advertises VPNs all the time? That's more a YouTube thing, to be fair. It's a YouTube thing, isn't it? Yeah. I'm trying to think what other podcast... That and mobile games. Other podcasty ones. What would be the equivalent of like Hover? I hear that one advertised a lot. Floating. Hover, Squarespace are the ones that I always think of. Linode gets advertised a lot. I'm mostly thinking of things that Adam Buxton has made a song for. Oh. Mac Weldon. Bose do quite a lot on podcasts. Do they? Because people are usually listening through headphones. They try to sell them headphones, which is weird because they clearly already have headphones. This episode has been brought to you by creepy local advertising that's been inserted at the time of download by tracking where you are. Hopefully it came in halfway through a sentence like it usually does. If you make podcasts, stop doing that, okay? It's awful. This is the after show now. I'm going to complain about the state of podcasting. Stop dynamically injecting ads. It is awful. It is terrible. Nobody likes it. It is really f***ing creepy when you hear an ad that is localized to where you are. Just stop it. You are ruining the industry, okay? Killing the sport. Stop it now. What I love is when I've been somewhere for a couple of days and it takes a while when I get home for it to catch up. Oh. I start getting advertised services in Aberdeen for a couple of days. It's just awful. Like, podcasting is fine. Like, the professional podcasters make plenty of money off the way it currently is. You don't need more data. You know, if you keep doing that, it's going to end up with podcasting being like YouTube or the web in general, which is an absolute show of advertising, and it's awful. I'm done. For now. Podcasts are great, but I'm going to keep going. Podcasts are great because it's completely independent. Like, we are not beholden to anyone at all. Like, the website is hosted on Linode. If Linode ever gets fed up with us, I can move the website somewhere else in like 5 minutes and everything will just work. Like, I'm not beholden to some weird policy changes from some big company. I'm not beholden to someone injecting adverts into the audio that we so carefully spend a lot of time producing and stuff. It's just, the file that I save on my computer and upload, or that Ryan saves on his computer, is the file that we upload, and it's the file that you download, and no one's screwed with it in the meantime.